that it always is. 12-year-old shoots his parents, kills his grandparents, goes and shoots the school. Every time, every case, they're on it, and really it's in the hallucinogenic category, the psychotropics are, and of course you know all of this,
correct.
And it basically puts you into this happy dream state until you, quote, have the bad trip. And with some people, it's always a bad trip. With, I guess, a few, everything is okay, still very toxic to the brain, very toxic to the body, and this is what drug dealers do. They get you addicted, then they string you out on more, and the average Texas foster child's on 4 drugs, some are on as many as 18. They actually murder children. WAI-TV did a big piece on it, where they know it. They just put them on, and they finally die. And then too bad they got to go find some more kids to do it to. But you got the doctors, the reps, everyone's in denial because it's compartmentalized. It's a centralized group that's come up with this. Now, you're already out of the industry. Then this incredible devastation comes to your own family's life. Your sister basically believed their whole line, and something terrible happened. Tell us about that, and then I want to get back into this new film that's coming out about the subject.
Well, I had left the industry in 2000 extremely disillusioned and brain damaged myself, actually, from the drugs, and decided that I would pursue a career in natural foods industry. So I went to selling herbs and all that. Well, I was very interested in the natural foods industry, so I really hadn't investigated what had happened to me on the SSRIs, because when it happened in 1992, they were very new. So there wasn't that body of evidence and information that's now out there if you can get on any internet search engine and find something out about the SSRIs. But back then it was, relatively new, and there wasn't a whole lot of information unless you looked in medical journals and things like that.
In fact, let me ask you this, Gwen. Back in the early 80s when they approved Prozac, it's admitted now. And this actually came out a long time ago, right around that time that you were working for them, but it was in a few publications, but not really publicly widely circulated, that they knew it radically increased suicide around 15%, which is a huge increase, and was actually a suicide drug. I mean, it really encouraged it. That was one of the main effects. And then here they are pushing it for depression. Did you ever hear that when you were in the industry? Did you ever hear anybody criticize?
Absolutely not. In fact, I only heard all of the positive information. The drugs were non-addicting. The drugs were benign. The drugs were not neurotoxic, all of that sort of thing. So I certainly didn't hear that information. But that's what I was saying, is I hadn't really investigated. So I was very naive myself about all of this information as to what was going on with this SSRI scandal. So in July of 2004, my niece, who at the time was a freshman at Indiana University, she was a pre-med student, former cheerleader, she was an honor student, honor graduate student, beautiful, beautiful young woman. She was in a car accident. And when she was trying to recover, they put her on very large doses of Vicodin, hydrocodone, and propoxyphene, Darvocet N100s. And she was on so many central nervous system depressants that she became depressed. Imagine that. And she also became addicted to the drugs. She told me she was taking between 8 to 10 Vicodin a day, and she weighed about 120 pounds. So she had a very serious hydrocodone addiction. And when she tried to withdraw from those drugs, she became even more depressed. And of course, if you look into the adverse reaction sections of any PI on this drug, you'll find that depression is very much a side effect of any kind of narcotic like that.
Well, in fact, any doctor, any nurse knows that when someone's coming off of opiate-style drugs, that they're going to get depressed. And that's 101, but now the doctors follow the drug company guidelines. That's what the AMA puts out because they're paid off. And so, you're depressed, you need Prozac. You need a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Which one did they put her on?
Initially, she was put on Paxil, and she reacted adversely to Paxil, and after that, they put her on Zoloft, and following Zoloft, she was put on Prozac, and then ended up on Effexor XR, which she took for about 9 months. But Megan's situation, when she started reacting negatively to the drugs, she was diagnosed as being bipolar. And when they diagnosed her as being bipolar, then that brought in a whole nother cocktail of pharmaceuticals that they added, the Depakote and Lamictal. And she ended up at one point, when I reviewed her pharmacy records that I got, she got them for me before she died, because I was actually trying to help her recover, because this had happened to me. So I knew what had happened, and I was trying to tell my sister that my niece was having adverse reactions to all the drugs that she was on.
The story of yourself, Gwen, and then what happened to your niece. In fact, in this film, there are two families from Austin
Yes.
who have lost children and loved ones through all of this. But Gwen, please continue with what ended up happening to your niece.
Well, after my niece received a bipolar diagnosis and they put her on other pharmaceuticals, other restraining drugs, she tried to commit suicide on a couple of different occasions in a couple of different ways. And the last time she tried to overdose, and she took all of her Effexor, and she took 3 hits of mescaline, and she took all of her hydrocodone. Anyway, she ended up in the hospital, and when she was released, she had to come to be cared for by family members. And her mother lived in Cedar Park. I live in Cedar Park. So she came to Texas. And I started telling my sister as I was identifying that she was rapid cycling, which is why she got the bipolar diagnosis. It's like the drugs will induce a bipolar state where a person will experience within 15 or 20-minute segments what a regular person who has a bipolar disorder would experience over a period of weeks or months. So she was actually going through this cycle of, teary eyes.
Which, by the way, the drug zone inserts say it does.
Exactly. And then she would get extremely depressed, and then she would hear command voices telling her to harm herself or to kill herself. And then she would go through a swing where she would get giddy, and she'd get extremely euphoric, and she'd be fine, and she'd be happy, and then here would come the tears again. And I told my sister, I said, she's having adverse reactions to these drugs, and the only way that she's going to get better is if we withdraw the pharmaceuticals and she starts to heal. So my niece had decided that she believed what I had said, and that's when I started my investigation. And when I got into the information, I was mortified. I mean, here I had been in this industry for 15 years, totally, I knew things were going on that I didn't approve of, and I knew that, the standards in the industry were not as ethical as I thought they should be. But I didn't realize that there were these cover-ups taking place. Just like you said, the clinical data. When I got into the clinical data on these drugs, this information has been out there since Jump Street, since they started the clinical trials.
They knew day one that it screwed people up and made them worse. Then they get them on more drugs. This is the classic street pusher coming up to the fence going, "Psst, kid, come here, I got some pills I want to give you. Tell us," I know it's hard to talk about, tell us what happened to your niece.
Long story short, we spent a period of time. My niece moved in with me because my sister had her arrested because she was violent. That's part of the profile, that people get violent, agitated. And the courts released her to me, so I was trying to help her go through a healing process. And this is difficult for me still. I'm sorry. Anyway, my sister decided that she didn't believe that this had really happened to my niece, that I was influencing her by my personal experience, and that she really did have a mental problem, that she needed a brain defect, that she needed drugs. She had, even though I gave her all of the books, I gave her CDs, I gave her the information to show her that this was real.
And by the way, you never had problems, she'd never had problems. It's 100%. In your case, her case, you go on this happens.
Well, I'm not going to say I'd never had problems.
We all have problems.
Yeah, we all have problems, but no, we didn't have psychological problems to the degree that either of us were ever suicidal, or that, but there was a little depression going on because of familial things and dysfunction in the family, that sort of thing, but it wasn't something that would have caused this. Anyway, what my sister did was she told my niece, she called her and told her that she was going to have to go back on the drugs, or she was going to have to return to Indiana. And my niece was desperate. She tried to call me and tell me that her mother was coming to get her, and the phone had been disconnected when I tried to call her back because my sister's phone had been disconnected. And I didn't get in touch with her, and my sister was on her way home to forcibly take her to the psychiatrist and put her back on drugs. And my niece first tried to hang herself.
I'll tell you what, we got a break. We'll come right back and finish up this horror story. But, Gwen, as you know, I know why you're doing this. You're going to save lives today telling this story, because it's happened to so many Austinites that I know personally, especially little girls. They target little girls with this stuff, young women, and it's all part of the whole Madison Avenue culture. They get depressed here, take some drugs because you don't look like the supermodel, or it's hard to look like the supermodel, and then they end up killing themselves. And then we'll talk about this new film. Stay with us. We haven't even gotten into this new film yet, Prescription Suicide, and we